Every single newspaper is brilliant news. This is about Britain set to rejoin the European Union scientific research programme Horizon with a discounted membership fee. This is an agreement that has been reached after a lot of wrangling. So initially, we, the United Kingdom, agreed a £15 billion membership fee, £15 billion, to join the 7-year research programme as part of the post-Brexit trade and cooperation deal. Now, there obviously are tensions around the Northern Ireland Protocol. The European Commission refused that deal, but Brussels has agreed not to charge Britain for the years it was locked out of the scheme during the row. Now, many people are saying that this is a brilliant thing because what it means is that actually the scientists in this country will benefit from this pool of 18 billion pounds that they can then apply for grants. Now, the question is, what's the caveat? What does this actually mean? And like anything, what is the small print? Well, joining us now is Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. He's also chairman of Brexit Watch. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, David.
So Ben, am I right in saying that actually the way this was reported in every single newspaper was beneficial to the UK? Was it?
Well, it's in relation to the EU, so it's unlikely to be beneficial to the UK. Look, Horizon Europe, it described in 2 or 3 words, does sound brilliant. It's a collaboration of scientists right across Europe, of investigating and doing research for the benefit of all of us. How could that be wrong? But when you look at the small print, it's not even small print, David. Actually, it's in big, bold letters on the website for Horizon Europe, which states that its fundamental aim is the promotion of EU policies, what the EU Commission deems to be important for the European Union. So in effect, what we will be doing over the next 5 years of what's left of this 7-year framework payment scheme for Horizon Europe is paying 2.6 billion euros from our taxpayers' money to Horizon Europe. The EU will then decide which projects British scientists have applied for that comply with what it deems to be in the EU's interests, and it will then give us, hopefully, our money back. That's effectively what Horizon Europe is.
So why don't we... Hang on, Ben. We're paying £2 billion a year. Why don't we actually ring-fence that money and decide which scientists in this country have £2 billion?
Exactly. Well, that's exactly right, David. You know, we don't need EU research for EU programmes that promote EU policy. What we need, and what Brexiteers have wanted right from the beginning, is national policy and British interests to be put first. In this case, British scientific interests. We don't want to be doing research which benefits EU interests. That's the fundamental problem I've got with it. But it's slightly more sinister than that as well, because 2 weeks before we signed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which provided the framework under which we've joined Horizon Europe, 2 weeks before Boris Johnson signed that, shoehorned into Horizon Europe. So I've got a slightly bad throat this morning. 2 weeks before we signed the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the European Defence Fund was shoehorned into Horizon Europe. And the European Defence Fund is military research for the advancement of EU military knowledge with an aim for interoperability across Europe, fundamentally promoting what they call permanent structured cooperation, which is the EU's alternative to NATO. So what we will be doing in this country is paying money into the EU effectively for the promotion and creation of an EU army, which will no doubt also be used to try and capture the British army. And I find that offensive. I find the whole Horizon Europe thing, frankly, a step back into the EU, a diminishing of British scientific interest. But I find the European Defence Fund absolutely, an affront to Brexit, an affront to those of us who voted to leave the European Union. We want nothing to do with the European army.
And it seems yet again, Ben, we're dancing to Europe's tune, the EU's tune. The fact is that I don't think the politicians here understand what is in this deal, as you've so articulately explained. I don't think the politicians know what's going on. I certainly don't think the public understand this.
No, they don't. It's been sold as a collaborative scientific programme across Europe for the greater good of all participants. And that's not what it is. It is the promotion of EU policies. And that's where it goes wrong. But that's the EU. Everything the EU does is fundamentally based on taking money from member states. In this case, it also includes the United Kingdom, choosing how it distributes that money and having the ability, therefore, to influence how that money is spent and what is done with it. And, you know, that's the heart of the European Union project. Wealth redistribution with a political aim. We got out of it because we didn't like it, and then we're being dragged back into it.
And so that, to me, seems incredibly sinister. Here we are again, sidling back into the European Union against the wishes of the people who voted to leave, the people who voted for Brexit at a big cost. Here we go again. Is this actually a conspiracy, do you think, by the politicians to realign us, to get us back into the European Union?
I wouldn't say it's a conspiracy. I think they do it in the open. You know, Boris Johnson said in his manifesto in 2019 that the country would leave the EU as one United Kingdom. Well, we didn't leave. He knew we were not going to leave as one United Kingdom. He knew that we would not be taking back control of our laws, our borders and our cash. We signed up to things in the withdrawal agreement and trade and cooperation agreement, Boris Johnson's Brexit deals, which prohibit the United Kingdom from actually really cutting the apron strings which attach us to the EU. We never really got Brexit. We're in orbit around the EU, and Sunak is allowing us to be sucked in. He claims the Windsor Framework broke Northern Ireland free. Well, he lied. The only way to describe the Windsor Framework is a lie. It's cemented in Northern Ireland being left behind. And when Sunak and others now promote the Horizon Europe is some kind of great beneficial program for British scientists, it's nonsense. We're going to give 2.6 billion euros every year to the EU, and then hopefully we're going to get 2.6 billion back. But we'll only get it back if we do their bidding. What sort of arrangement is that? It's absurd.
And something else that you messaged me about. What happens if we decide that we don't want to be part of it? Can we leave?
We can't. And I'm glad you reminded me of that, David. We can't leave. The only way we can get out is if the EU decides it wants to boot us out. So in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, we signed ourselves into it back in late 2020 when that deal was signed. But they decided they weren't going to let us in for 2 years because they were going to use it as a mechanism to bully us over Northern Ireland. Only when Sunak collapsed on Northern Ireland did they let us in. And we are now hooked into it, and we will stay in it, and we will go on paying whatever the sub is until the EU decides it wants to boot us out, if it should ever decide that. Of course it won't, because it loves British money.
Of course
that's why they want us. They want British money. That's been the whole thing, hasn't it?
So we didn't vote for this. We can't get out of it. We're paying £2 billion a year to do this. Also, when I look at the Labour Party, it's already made it clear it will formalise and institutionalise foreign policy cooperation with the EU if it's elected. It will then strike a deal on animal and plant health standards, i.e. removing the border checks by facing exports to the EU and Northern Ireland. So essentially, excuse me, the direction of travel is clear. We're going back into the EU.
We are going, in all but name, we didn't properly leave, and we're going closer. And that orbit that I described that we're stuck in is getting smaller and smaller. We're being sucked back in. And the other thing, you mentioned EU foreign policy. We've joined something called PESCO Mobility, which is the permanent structured cooperation, their alternative to NATO mobility, which again, on the face of it, looks like a very sensible thing for us to join. It gives British armed forces the right to move across Europe freely if we need to for military purposes. Who wouldn't want that? Makes sense, right? But when you read this, and you do have to read the small print here, when you sign up to PESCO Mobility, or indeed any other PESCO project, you commit to supporting EU foreign policy. You commit not to go against EU foreign policy. So we, as a country, have already committed not to challenge the EU on what its foreign policy might be, even if we disagree with it. It's completely wrong.
I agree, Ben. Completely wrong. Ben Habib there. Thank you so much, Ben. Really good to talk to you. That's Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP, chairman of Brexit Watch. Your face, your mouth dropped open when I said, because I knew we couldn't leave.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that bit, but you know what it highlights to me, as I discovered this week when I was reading the energy bill, that the problem is that most people don't have the wherewithal, the time, the will to read the small print, and that's the problem. And I suspect that most of our constituency MPs don't read the small print either. So
I don't think
really
they know.
Don't know.
Honestly, I don't think they know.
When I challenge my MP on the IFR treaty and the WHO, he actually talks to me like he doesn't know, he hasn't read it. They just spout the party line.
We should actually ask every single MP whether we can leave Horizon.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we get people to email their local MP and ask them, are we able to leave Horizon?